The man was bleeding through his shirt, and nobody had noticed but her. Selene Voss saw it the moment she pushed through the double doors into the waiting area. Not a flood, not a drama, just a slow, deliberate darkening of fabric along his left side, hidden beneath the careful drape of a charcoal jacket. He sat completely still in a row of plastic chairs, spine straight, jaw set, one hand resting with practiced casualness against his ribs. Everything about his posture said, "I am fine." Everything about that spreading stain said otherwise. She had been on her feet for 9 hours already. There were 14 people ahead of him on the intake board, 2 nurses behind on documentation, and a trauma case in Bay 4 that had aged her by approximately 3 years in the last 40 minutes. She did not have time for a man performing composure in her waiting room. She crossed the floor anyway. "You're bleeding," she said. Not loudly, not unkindly, just plainly, the way she said everything. He looked up at her. His eyes were dark, steady, and completely unsurprised, as though he had been waiting for someone to say exactly that and had simply been curious how long it would take. He was somewhere in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from discipline. There was a difference. She knew it well. "I'm fine," he said. "You're not." She crouched slightly so she was at his eye level, keeping her voice low. "The jacket is a good idea, but the fabric is thin. You've been here." She glanced at the intake clock on the far wall. "Approximately 22 minutes, which means you've been bleeding for at least that long before you arrived. You need to come with me now." Something shifted in his expression. Not alarm. Something closer to assessment. Before he could respond, 2 men appeared from either side of the waiting room. She hadn't even clocked them when she walked in, which told her they were deliberate about not being clocked. Dark suits, hands loose at their sides, eyes moving to her with the particular flatness of men trained to treat every unknown person as a variable to be managed. One of them stepped forward. "Sir is not in this emergency room," Selene said, turning to face him with the full weight of her attention. "Everyone is seen in the order of medical need. Everyone waits their turn, and everyone who is bleeding gets treated. So you can sit back down, or you can leave this building. Those are your options." A silence settled over the immediate area. 2 people in nearby chairs looked up from their phones. The man in the suit held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked to the man in the chair. The man in the chair stood up. "Lead the way," he said. She took him to a bay at the far end of the floor, away from the higher traffic areas, and drew the curtain. When she helped him ease the jacket off, she kept her face neutral. The wound was a laceration, clean, deep, running 4 inches along the lower left rib cage. Not a fall, not an accident. She had seen 11 years of accidents. This was not one. She said nothing about it. She prepared the tray, snapped on her gloves, and began. "This is going to need 8 sutures," she said. "Possibly 10. You're going to feel the local anesthetic first, then pressure. Tell me if anything feels sharp after that." "Understood," he said. She worked. He sat without flinching, without speaking, watching her hands with that same steady assessment. Most people talked when they were nervous. He didn't talk at all, which meant either he wasn't nervous or he had trained himself out of showing it. She suspected both. "False name on the intake form," she said, not looking up from the suture. A pause. "Yes." "Cash payment." "Yes." She tied off the 3rd suture. "I'm not going to ask you why. It's not my business why. My business is making sure you don't bleed out in my waiting room." She glanced up briefly. "But I want you to know that I know, because I find it useful when people understand that very little gets past me in this room." He looked at her for a long moment. "Noted," he said, and then quietly, something that might almost have been the beginning of a smile. "You're very direct." "I find it saves time." She finished the sutures, dressed the wound, gave him a clear set of aftercare instructions, and discharged him with the same efficiency she gave every patient. He stood, shrugged his jacket back on, carefully, and paused at the curtain. "Thank you," he said. "Don't pull the sutures," she said. "And don't wait 22 minutes next time." He left. She went back to work and didn't think about him again that night. Or so she told herself. It was the hospital administrator who told her 45 minutes later who he was. Gerald Osei had worked at Meridian General for 19 years and had the permanent expression of a man trying to prevent a disaster he could already see coming. He found Selene at the nurse's station with the particular energy of someone who needed to say something difficult and hadn't yet decided how. "The man you treated tonight," he said. "Bay 11. "What about him?" Gerald lowered his voice. "That was Marcus Tael." She looked at him. The name landed with weight because it was a name that carried weight in Port Carris. Marcus Tael, the Tael Group, the single largest private donor to Meridian General's new trauma wing. A $12 million endowment that had been announced 8 months ago with a press conference and a great deal of photographs. A name attached to real estate developments, import logistics, and several community foundations across the city. A name that appeared in business sections, not crime reports, though she had heard people imply that the distance between those two categories in his case was a matter of ongoing negotiation. "He sat in the public waiting room," she said. "I know." "He gave a false name." "I know that too." Gerald looked pained. "I just wanted you to be aware, going forward, that if he or anyone connected to him requires medical attention, they'll receive the same standard of care as every other patient," Selene said. "Was there something else?" Gerald opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said. "No, that covers it." She went back to her charts. But privately, in the quiet of her own mind, she turned it over. A man that powerful, with 2 bodyguards in the waiting room, choosing to sit in a row of plastic chairs under fluorescent lights rather than make a single phone call to a private physician. That was a choice. Everything was a choice. And choices, in her experience, were the most honest thing about a person. He hadn't wanted to be seen. Not by his own people, not by a private doctor who might talk. He had come somewhere anonymous, somewhere busy, somewhere that would process him without asking the right questions. She had asked the right questions. She filed that thought away and moved on. Thursday arrived with a stabbing in the warehouse district and a 4-car collision on the coastal road, and Selene didn't surface from the clinical grind until nearly 2 in the afternoon. That was when the man came in with the gunshot wound. Left shoulder, through and through, wrapped in a cloth that had once been a shirt. He was escorted in by a single companion who spoke for him. False name, cash on the intake desk before anyone asked. A rehearsed story about a hunting accident that had several logistical problems, including the fact that the wound trajectory was inconsistent with a rifle at any reasonable hunting distance. Selene treated him without commentary. She cleaned the wound, confirmed no arterial involvement, packed and dressed it, administered antibiotics. Standard, efficient. It was when she was applying the final dressing that she saw it. A tattoo on his left inner wrist. Small, precise, geometric. A shape like an angular compass rose, rendered in thin, dark lines. Clean work, deliberate. She had seen that tattoo 4 days ago on the wrist of a man in a charcoal jacket who had sat very still in her waiting room and bled through his shirt. She said nothing. She finished the dressing, gave instructions, and discharged him. But she documented everything, every detail, every inconsistency, every observable fact. She wrote it in the clinical notes the way she wrote everything, precisely, completely, without editorializing. She noted the tattoo. She noted the false name. She noted the cash. Then she went back to work and waited to see what Saturday would bring. If this story is already pulling you in, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us. There is a lot more tension coming, and you don't want to miss where this goes. Saturday brought a man with broken ribs. He came in around mid-morning, walking carefully in the way people walked when breathing hurt. Short, controlled breaths, body slightly forward, one arm braced across his midsection. His companion this time was a woman who spoke quickly and gave a name that didn't match the face on the patient's visible loyalty card, which was sticking out of his jacket pocket and which nobody else had thought to look at. Selene looked at it. Same tattoo, same cash, same pattern, false identity, injured, frightened in a way the first man hadn't quite been. This man's fear was closer to the surface. He watched the door while she examined him. His eyes moved to every person who passed the open curtain. She sat down across from him. She kept her voice very quiet. "I'm not going to ask who hurt you," she said. "That's not my job. My job is to make sure you're breathing properly and that those ribs aren't pressing against anything they shouldn't be. But I want you to understand something." She waited until his eyes came to hers and held. "You're the second person with that tattoo I've treated in 5 days. Whatever is happening, it's escalating. And the next person who comes through that door with your mark on their wrist might not be as stable as you are." He stared at her. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Yes, you do," she said, not unkindly. "Rest. I'll be back in 20 minutes. She ordered the imaging, reviewed the films, confirmed 2 clean fractures and no pneumothorax, and sent him home with a brace, pain management instructions, and a follow-up appointment she already suspected he would not keep. 3 days, 2 men, same tattoo, same pattern, same fear at different intensities. She went home that Saturday evening, made coffee she didn't drink, and sat at her kitchen table with a notepad. She didn't write anything dramatic. She simply wrote what she had seen in the order she had seen it and looked at it until the shape of it became clear. Something was coming apart somewhere, and it was bleeding into her emergency room one man at a time. Her phone rang at 9:15 on Sunday evening. The number was unfamiliar. She almost didn't answer it. "Dr. Voss," said the voice on the other end, measured, low, immediately recognizable. "This is Marcus Tael. I hope I'm not disturbing you." She looked at the notepad on her kitchen table. "No," she said. "I've been expecting you." "We are just getting started. The dinner conversation in the next part is where everything changes. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Drop a comment telling us what you think of Selene so far. And if this story has you hooked, hit that like button." There was a restaurant on the eastern edge of Port Carris Harbor called Linden and Gray. It was the kind of place that didn't advertise, didn't take walk-ins, and didn't appear on any of the popular booking platforms. You knew about it because someone who mattered had told you about it, and that person had known about it because someone who mattered had told them. The menu changed weekly. The tables were spaced far enough apart that a conversation at one could not be heard at another. The lighting was low without being theatrical. Selene had never been. She wore a dark green dress she had owned for 3 years and rarely had occasion to use. And she arrived exactly on time because she arrived everywhere exactly on time. Marcus Tael was already seated. He stood when she approached, not performatively, just naturally, the way certain men did when they had been raised with a particular set of standards and had never bothered to discard them. He looked different outside the hospital. The stillness was the same, but without the fluorescent lighting and the clinical context, it read differently. Less like discipline under pressure, more like a man who had simply decided a long time ago who he was going to be and had not wavered since. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said it was a donor appreciation dinner," she said, sitting down. "I assume that was partially true." "Partially," he agreed, and sat across from her. "The appreciation is genuine. The rest? Yes, there are things I want to discuss." A server appeared, poured water, and disappeared without a word. "Tell me about the Tael group," Selene said. "The version you don't give to journalists." He looked at her steadily for a moment. Then he picked up the water glass, considered it, Set it down. My father built the organization over 30 years, he said. He was not a clean man. He operated in spaces that I will not romanticize to you. You're too perceptive for that, and I don't have the patience for it. When he died 7 years ago, I inherited everything. The assets, the infrastructure, the relationships, and the reputation. A pause. I have spent the last 4 years dismantling the parts that cannot survive scrutiny and replacing them with things that can. Legal investments, legitimate logistics, community partnerships. Meridian General's trauma wing is part of that. Not a costume, an actual commitment. But someone doesn't want that to happen, Selene said. His name is Dario Finch, Marcus said. He runs a network that operates in the spaces my father used to occupy. The difference is that my father had a code, a set of limits he would not cross. Finch has no such limits. He moves weapons. He moves people. He uses legitimate businesses as shells for things that would make a federal prosecutor very happy. His voice was even, almost clinical. He has spent the last 18 months trying to destabilize my transition. If I complete the legitimization process, his access to certain corridors closes permanently. He needs me to fail. So he's targeting your people, Selene said, systematically. Something tightened briefly around his eyes. He is not trying to destroy me directly. He is cutting around me, frightening the people in my organization who are not yet fully committed to the new direction, sending a message that my protection has limits. Selene reached into her bag and placed 3 folded intake forms on the white tablecloth between them. She smoothed them flat with one hand and turned them so he could read them. Tuesday, she said, touching the first form. Thursday, the second. Saturday, the third. Marcus looked at the forms. He did not reach for them. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The tattoo, he said quietly. 3 men in 8 days, all with the same mark on the left inner wrist, all using false names, all paying cash, all frightened. She folded her hands on the table. The first one sat in my waiting room and bled through his jacket rather than draw attention. The second was managing pain well enough to perform stability he didn't have. The third, she paused. The third was watching the door the entire time I examined him. He wasn't just hurt, Marcus. He was scared of what came next. A silence settled over the table that had a different quality than the general quiet of the restaurant. Marcus looked at the intake forms for a long moment, then back at her. You kept records, he said. I keep records of everything. It's called medicine. Most people would not have connected them. Most people are not paying attention, she said. I am always paying attention. That is not a skill I can switch off. She held his gaze. Whatever is escalating out there, it is already here. It walked through my emergency room 3 times in 8 days. The 4th time it walks through, it may not walk out. He was quiet for a long moment. The harbor lights moved on the water beyond the window. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. I owe you more honesty than I have given you, he said. Yes, she said simply. You do. I knew my people were coming to Meridian General. Not specifically, I didn't direct them there. But it is a large hospital, efficient, relatively anonymous for a facility of its size. When men in my organization are hurt and do not want questions, they make decisions about where to go. It appears several of them made the same one. And you came there yourself, Selene said. I came there myself. Why not a private physician? You have the resources. He turned the water glass slowly in his hands. A private physician has a name. A name has a file. A file can be found. He looked up. I needed discretion more than comfort that night. And instead you got me. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. And instead I got you. A beat. Which, it turns out, was considerably more than I bargained for. Selene looked at him across the table. She had spent 11 years reading people at their most exposed, stripped of performance by pain, by fear, by the particular vulnerability of lying on a hospital bed while a stranger made decisions about their body. She had learned to tell the difference between a man managing his image and a man telling the truth. Marcus Tael, in this moment, was telling the truth. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Nothing dangerous," he said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. I am not here to recruit you into anything. I came tonight because I wanted you to have context, because you are clearly already involved whether either of us chose it, and I would rather you understand what you're adjacent to than stumble into it uninformed." "That's thoughtful," she said, "but you should know that I don't stumble, and I don't wait for information to be handed to me. If something is happening in or around my hospital, I will find out about it with or without your assistance." She picked up the menu and opened it with the same composure she brought to everything. "So the question is whether we have this conversation together or whether I have it alone." He watched her for a moment. Then he picked up his own menu. "Together," he said. They talked for 2 hours, not just about Finch, not just about the organization, about Port Carris, about the hospital, about what it meant to build something clean out of something that had never been. He asked her questions and listened to the answers with full attention, the kind of attention that was becoming rarer and that she had stopped expecting from most rooms she entered. She asked him questions he clearly hadn't expected and answered them without deflection when she pressed. She drove home at midnight along the coastal road with the windows down and the harbor air moving through the car, and she sat with the feeling that something had shifted, not dramatically, not in the way of films and grand gestures, just shifted, the way weight redistributes when something locked finally opens. She went to bed and slept well for the first time in several days. Wednesday came in cold and gray, the kind of Port Carris morning where the fog sat on the water and didn't lift until noon. Selene was 3 hours into her shift when the third man arrived. Not the third man from before. A new one. Fourth in the sequence, though she was counting differently now. He came in through the ambulance bay, which meant someone had called it in, which meant this one hadn't been able to manage his own arrival. Deep laceration along the forearm, jagged, the kind that came from something serrated or broken rather than a blade. He was shaking in a way that had nothing to do with blood loss. His pressure was low, but not critically. His color was off, but manageable. The shaking was fear. Pure, unmanaged, spilling out of him fear. Same tattoo. Left inner wrist. Selene closed the curtain, sent the nurse for the suture kit, and sat down directly in front of him before she touched the wound. "Look at me," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were glassy with adrenaline. "My name is Dr. Voss. You are safe in this room. I am going to close that laceration, and you are going to be fine. But I need you to breathe with me for 30 seconds first, because your hands are shaking, and I need them still." She breathed in slowly, held his gaze. In and out. He followed her. 30 seconds. The shaking reduced. "Good," she said. "Now, what happened?" "I can't," he started. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said. "Tell me what's relevant to treating you. The rest you keep." He swallowed. "I was at a depot on the south side. There were men there who shouldn't have been. It went wrong." His eyes went to the curtain. "They know about this hospital. I heard them say it. They said—" He stopped. "What did they say?" His voice dropped to almost nothing. "They said they had someone on the inside." The nurse returned with the tray. Selene began working on the laceration, irrigating, assessing depth, preparing the suture. Her hands were completely steady. Her mind was moving very fast. Someone inside the hospital. Finch's network had eyes on Meridian General. Possibly more than eyes. She finished the sutures in 11 minutes. Dressed the wound, documented everything, handed him aftercare instructions, with a look that told him clearly she had heard every word he said and was taking it seriously. Then she walked to the supply corridor at the far end of the ER floor, a narrow, fluorescent-lit passage between the medication storage and the linen room, reliably empty at this hour. And she called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. "They're watching the hospital," she said without preamble. "A patient just told me Finch's people have discussed it directly." He used the words, "someone on the inside." A silence on the line. Then Marcus's voice, stripped of its usual composure for the first time since she had known him. "Selene, listen to me. Do not leave the building tonight. Stay in the hospital until I tell you otherwise. I have a shift that ends at... I know when your shift ends. I'm asking you to stay anyway. Can you do that?" She looked at the supply corridor wall, at the shelves of neatly stacked equipment around her, at the fluorescent light humming overhead. "Yes," she said, "but Marcus, I'm not going to simply wait." A pause. "I know," he said quietly. "I wouldn't expect you to. We are deep in it now. If this story has you gripping your phone, share it with someone who loves a good thriller. Drop a comment below. Do you trust Marcus? Because Selene is starting to, and that might be the most dangerous thing she's done yet. Like the video and stay with us. This is where everything breaks open. She started with the archives, not because she had a plan, not yet, but because sitting still while something moved around her was not something her mind would allow. She had 2 hours before her shift technically ended, 4 more that she had promised Marcus, and a supply corridor conversation replaying itself on a loop that she needed to do something productive with. Someone on the inside. She pulled up the hospital's internal record system on the terminal in the small administrative office adjacent to the nursing station, a room used primarily for shift handovers and the occasional tearful phone call, empty now at this hour. She did not go looking for anything dramatic. She went looking for the thing she had almost forgotten about, the thing she had flagged 2 years ago, written a note about, and then buried under the weight of 14-hour shifts and a department that never stopped needing her. The supply manifest anomaly. It had started as a footnote in a routine audit, the kind of internal review that happened every 18 months, and that most clinical staff ignored entirely. Selene had not ignored it, because Selene did not ignore things. A discrepancy in the surgical equipment orders for a 6-month period roughly 3 years ago. Quantities that didn't match usage logs. Delivery confirmations routed to an address that wasn't Meridian General's receiving dock. A vendor name she didn't recognize attached to orders that should have gone through their standard approved suppliers. She had flagged it to the procurement administrator at the time. Been told it was likely a clerical error. Been told it had been looked into. Never received a follow-up. She had written it down because she wrote everything down and moved on. She found the note now in her own archived folder, dated 26 months ago, 3 lines, vendor name, Callaway Medical Solutions, delivery address, a postal code on the south side of Port Carris Industrial District, total discrepancy across the 6-month period, approximately $40,000 in equipment that had been ordered, paid for, and apparently delivered somewhere that was not this hospital. She opened a new search window and typed in the vendor name. Callaway Medical Solutions had a website, sparse, generic, the kind of website that existed to answer a specific question without inviting further ones. Registered business, listed address in Port Carris, a phone number she suspected would ring indefinitely, a list of products that covered a broad range of surgical and diagnostic equipment, nothing overtly suspicious. She looked at the registered address, south side of Port Carris, Industrial District, the same area her patient had mentioned 20 minutes ago when he told her he'd been at a depot. She sat very still for a moment. Then she called Marcus again. "I need you to tell me," she said when he picked up, "whether the name Callaway Medical Solutions means anything to you." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm that it did. "Where did you find that name?" he said. "In my own records," she said. 2 years ago, I flagged a supply discrepancy connected to that vendor. $40,000 of equipment ordered from Meridian General's accounts, paid for, and delivered to an address in the South Industrial District. I was told it was a clerical error. I don't believe that anymore. She could hear him processing this. When he spoke, his voice had the careful quality of a man choosing his words with precision. Callaway Medical Solutions is one of 6 shell companies connected to Fench's financial network, he said. We identified it 8 months ago through our own internal investigation. It is one of the primary vehicles he uses to launder money through legitimate medical supply chains. Orders get placed through real hospital procurement systems, sometimes through inside contacts, sometimes through compromised vendor accounts. Equipment gets invoiced, money moves, the equipment never arrives or arrives somewhere entirely different. Selene looked at the screen in front of her. He has been running this through Meridian General for at least 3 years. Possibly longer, Marcus said. And if he has someone inside the hospital currently, it is not just for surveillance. It is to protect that pipeline. If that supply chain gets exposed, a significant portion of his financial operation collapses. Then that's where we go, she said. Selene, I have records, Marcus. 2 years of archived data that nobody followed up on because I was told it was a clerical error by someone who either didn't look hard enough or didn't want to look at all. She pulled up a second window and began cross-referencing. If I can connect Callaway Medical Solutions to a pattern of fraudulent orders across multiple billing periods, that is a federal paper trail. That is not speculation. That is documentation. You would need someone to take it seriously, he said. I have someone, she said. I worked a hospital fraud case 4 years ago. There was a federal investigator, a woman named Adesi Nwosu. She was thorough, she was honest, and she gave me her direct line when the case closed and told me to use it if I ever saw something that needed to go somewhere. A beat. I think this qualifies. A long silence on the line. You're not going to wait for my approval, he said. It wasn't a question. No, she said, but I'm telling you, because that's the difference between partnership and going around someone. She looked at the screen. I am not going around you. I am telling you what I'm doing and why. If you have a reason I shouldn't, tell me now. Another silence. Shorter this time. I don't, he said quietly. He stopped. Started again. Be careful with what you send and how you send it. If Fench has someone inside that building, they may be monitoring internal communications. I'll use my personal device and a personal email account, she said. Nothing that routes through the hospital system. Good. There's one more thing, she said. She had been working toward this, and the working toward it had been the part she was not looking forward to. The financial records I'm looking at, the pattern of orders, the vendor accounts, the routing, there is an internal authorization signature on several of these procurement approvals. She paused. To get fraudulent orders through a hospital system at this level, you need someone with procurement access, someone who can approve unusual vendor requests without triggering an automatic audit flag. You think there's a mole inside the hospital? Marcus said. I think there might be, she said, but I also think... She stopped. What? She looked at the authorization signatures on the screen more carefully, cross-referenced them against the staff directory, against the dates of the orders, against the access logs that showed who had been logged into the procurement system during each relevant period. The same internal account, appearing on 6 of the 9 fraudulent approvals across a 3-year period. A name she recognized. Not from the procurement department. From somewhere much closer to Marcus Tael than that. Her voice was carefully level when she spoke. Marcus, she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Ask. How long has a man named Krell been part of your organization? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. It had a different texture than the others. Heavier, with something underneath it that she recognized as pain, trying to stay contained. 9 years, Marcus said finally. He came in through the logistics side. My father trusted him. I trusted him. A pause. Why? Because his name, or rather the internal hospital account he appears to have access to, appears on the majority of the fraudulent procurement approvals I'm looking at. She spoke carefully, clearly, giving him every word with full weight. He has been authorizing payments to Callaway Medical Solutions through Meridian General's procurement system. He has been doing it for at least 3 years, possibly from the beginning. Nothing on the line, just silence and the faint ambient sound of wherever Marcus was. He is the inside contact, Selene said gently. He is the person Finch has in the hospital. He is also the person feeding Finch information about your organization from the inside. She waited. Marcus, I'm here, he said. His voice was completely flat in a way that told her everything about what was happening underneath it. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it, not as a formality, but as a genuine human acknowledgement of what it meant to discover that a person you had trusted for 9 years had been working against you for at least 3 of them. 9 years, he said again, almost to himself. I know. Another long pause. She didn't try to fill it. Some silences needed to be sat in rather than spoken over. When he spoke again, his voice had recovered its steadiness, not by suppressing the emotion she sensed, but by placing it somewhere deliberate and returning to the task. What do we do? He said. And the fact that he said we, that he said it without hesitation, without any instinct to take over or sideline her, settled something in her chest that she hadn't known was unsettled. I'm going to compile everything I have tonight, she said. Every anomalous order, every authorization signature, every routing address. I'm going to cross-reference it against what you know about Callaway Medical Solutions and the other shell companies in Finch's network. And then I'm going to contact Adaizi Nwosu with a package that gives federal investigators enough to open a formal case. She pulled up a new document and began typing. But I need you to send me everything you have on Finch's financial structure. Not the dangerous details, the paper trail, the business registrations, the known shell company names, the financial routing you identified 8 months ago. I can have that to you within the hour, he said. Good. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was past midnight. And Marcus, Krell, you need to be careful about how you handle this on your end. If he knows we've identified him, he will warn Finch. And if Finch knows we're moving, he will move first. I understand, Marcus said. I won't approach Krell directly. Not yet. Not until the federal case is open and there is enough to offer him a cooperation arrangement, she said. At that point, the choice is his. But he needs to make it under legal pressure, not personal confrontation. You've thought about this before, Marcus said, not accusingly, more like someone recalibrating their understanding of a person they thought they had already fully assessed. I think about most things before they become necessary, she said. It saves time. She heard something on his end that might have been a quiet exhale, might have been something closer to a laugh, cut short. I'll send the files, he said. Thank you. She was about to end the call when he said her name. Selene. Yes. I want you to know. A pause. Careful. The way you handle everything, the way you see things. I have been in rooms with very capable people for a very long time, and I have not often met someone who combines what you combine. He stopped. I don't know how to say that without it sounding reductive. She looked at the window of the administrative office, at the dark glass reflecting the fluorescent light back at her. It doesn't sound reductive, she said quietly. It sounds like the truth. She ended the call. Outside the office window, the ER floor continued its relentless movement, the stretchers and the voices and the monitors and the people arriving in pain and leaving less of it. The machine of it, familiar and consuming, and hers. She turned back to the screen and began to build the case. The walls are closing in on Finch, but the most dangerous moment in any operation is just before it succeeds. If you've made it this far, you already know this story has you. Subscribe if you haven't already, like this video, and drop a comment. Are you shocked about Krell? 9 years. Let that sit. This is the one you've been waiting for. The files Marcus sent were meticulous. She had expected organized. He struck her as a man who kept organized records the way she kept clinical notes, out of discipline rather than obligation. But what arrived in her personal inbox just after 1 a.m. was more than organized. It was comprehensive. 6 shell company registrations with corresponding financial routing numbers. Transaction histories showing money moving between Callaway Medical Solutions and 4 other entities across a 3-year period. Incorporation documents filed in 3 different jurisdictions. A detailed internal memo his team had compiled 8 months ago when they first identified the network, laying out Fench's financial infrastructure with the kind of precision that told her someone very intelligent had been working on this for a long time. She read everything twice. Then she opened her own compiled records alongside them and began to cross-reference. The match was not subtle. Callaway Medical Solutions appeared in both sets of documents with identical routing information. The delivery addresses on the fraudulent Meridian general orders corresponded to 2 of the other shell company locations Marcus had identified. The financial pattern, the timing of the orders, the invoice amounts, the payment cycles, mapped directly onto the movement cycles in Marcus's transaction histories. This was not coincidence layered on coincidence. This was a single coordinated operation, and she was now looking at it from both ends simultaneously. She worked for 2 hours without stopping. She cross-referenced, she annotated, she built a chronological document that laid out the entire 3-year pipeline in plain, precise language. The kind of language that left no room for ambiguity, and that a federal prosecutor could hand to a jury without needing to translate it. She pulled the authorization signatures again, documented Krell's account access across every relevant date, and added a separate section detailing the pattern of injured men arriving at Meridian General, the tattoos, the false names, the cash payments, the escalating fear, as evidence of the physical component of Fench's destabilization campaign against the Tael group. By 3 a.m, she had a document of 41 pages. She read it once from the beginning, corrected 2 formatting inconsistencies, and then sat back in the chair and looked at what she had built. It was enough. She knew it was enough the same way she knew when a patient was stable. Not from a single indicator, but from the complete picture, every variable pointing in the same direction. This was stable. This would hold. She picked up her phone and composed an email to Adaize Nwosu. She did not write a long preamble. She wrote 4 sentences. She had significant documentation of a federal fraud operation using a Port Carris hospital's procurement system as a financial laundering vehicle, connected to a known criminal network. She had corroborating financial records from a secondary source. She was attaching everything. She was available to speak at any hour. She attached the document. She pressed send. Then she leaned back, closed her eyes for approximately 4 minutes, and went back to work. Adaize Nwosu called at 6:47 in the morning. Selene was in Bay 3 with a man who had come in with chest pains that had resolved into anxiety and acid reflux, and she stepped into the corridor to take the call with the particular composure of someone who had not slept and was not going to mention it. "Dr. Voss," Adaize said. She had a voice like a closing door. "Definitive, efficient, no space wasted. I've read your document. Twice. I want to ask you several questions, and I need your complete honesty on all of them." "That is the only kind of honesty I have," Selene said. "Good." A pause. The sound of pages turning. "The secondary source whose financial records you've incorporated, you describe them as having conducted an independent internal investigation. Who are they, and what is their relationship to the target network?" Selene had anticipated this question. She had thought about it carefully at approximately 2:15 in the morning while cross-referencing the incorporation documents. They are a party whose organization has been directly targeted by Fench's destabilization campaign, she said. They have a significant interest in seeing this network exposed and dismantled. Their records are independently corroborated by the hospital documentation I've provided. The financial routing matches are exact, not approximate. The source's credibility can be assessed against the documentary evidence rather than taken on faith. I'll need their identity eventually, Adiz said. I know. At the point where you need it, they will provide it directly. She paused. They are prepared to cooperate fully with a federal investigation. That has been made clear to me. Another pause. More page turning. The internal hospital account connected to the individual you've named as the mole, Adaizi said. You're confident in that attribution? The account access logs are from Meridian General's own internal system, Selene said. I pulled them through my administrative credentials. The access pattern is consistent across every relevant date. The same account, the same procurement approval pathway, the same vendor routing. If someone other than the named account holder was using those credentials, that itself constitutes a serious internal security breach. Either way, the trail leads to the same person. What is your current relationship with this individual? None, Selene said. I identified him through records. I have not spoken to him, approached him, or given any indication that he has been identified. I understand the importance of that. A silence on the line that felt like evaluation. Dr. Voss, Adiz said finally, in 4 years of working federal fraud cases, I have received a great many tips. Most of them are incomplete, speculative, or motivated by something that compromises their reliability. A beat. This document is none of those things. It is one of the most clearly constructed pieces of evidentiary documentation I have received from a non-investigator. Another beat. I am opening a formal case this morning. Something in Selene's chest released quietly. She kept her voice level. What do you need from me going forward? Stay available. Don't approach Krell. Don't discuss this with anyone inside the hospital. And if anything changes, if you observe anything that suggests the network is aware of the investigation, contact me immediately on the number I'm calling from. Understood, Selene said. One more thing, Adizi said. The individual I'll eventually need to speak to, your secondary source. How quickly can that be arranged? As quickly as you need it, Selene said. I'll make one call. She made the call from the supply corridor again. It was becoming a habit. Marcus picked up immediately, as though he had been awake and waiting, which she suspected he had. Federal case is open, she said. Adaizen Wosu is the lead investigator. She is thorough, she is honest, and she will need to speak with you directly within the next 24 to 48 hours. Are you prepared for that? Yes, he said, without hesitation, without the slight pause that might have indicated calculation or reluctance. Just yes, clean, and immediate. She will want the full financial records, everything you sent me and whatever else your internal investigation produced. She'll have it. And Marcus, Krell. She kept her voice even. The federal case being open changes the landscape for him. If investigators move before he is approached with a cooperation offer, he has less incentive to provide useful testimony. The timing of when he finds out needs to be managed carefully. Adaiz will handle that, Marcus said. Yes, but you need to be prepared for the conversation you'll eventually have to have with him directly. A pause. Not legally, personally. A silence. She could feel the weight of it through the phone. 9 years, he said again. The same 2 words he had said the night before, but they sounded different now. Less like shock and more like a man holding something he had decided to carry rather than put down. I know, she said, but if he cooperates, if the evidence against Fench is as complete as I believe it is, Krell will have made a choice under pressure that might partially undo the damage. That doesn't erase 9 years of betrayal, but it matters, does it? He said, not bitterly, genuinely asking. She thought about it for a moment. I've watched people in the worst moments of their lives make choices that surprised everyone, including themselves, she said. Pain and pressure don't just reveal who someone is. Sometimes they reveal who someone is capable of becoming. I don't know which one Krell is, but I think it's worth finding out. Another silence. Longer this time. Warmer, somehow. You believe in people, Marcus said. It sounded like a discovery. I believe in evidence, she said, but I also believe in the possibility of evidence changing. She paused. There's a difference between naivety and refusing to foreclose on a person before you have all the data. She heard him breathe. I'll be ready for Nwosu's call, he said. Good. And Marcus, go and sleep. Whatever you're doing right now at... She checked the clock on the corridor wall. 7:14 in the morning. Stop doing it and sleep for a few hours. You're going to need to be sharp for the next several days. A quiet sound on his end. Definitely a laugh this time, brief and genuine. Are you giving me medical advice? I'm giving you practical advice, she said. It happens to overlap. She ended the call, straightened her coat, and walked back onto the ER floor. The next 3 days moved with the particular compressed intensity of a situation approaching its resolution, each hour carrying more weight than the one before it, each piece of information tightening the picture further. Adaeze Nwosu worked with a speed and precision that Selene found deeply satisfying. The federal team cross-referenced the financial documentation against banking records, corporate filings, and surveillance data they had already been compiling on Fench's network from a separate angle. What Selene had provided gave them the connective tissue, the link between Fench's financial infrastructure and a legitimate institutional system that made the money laundering federal rather than local. Krell was approached on a Thursday morning, not at the hospital, at his home, quietly, by 2 federal investigators who arrived before he left for work, and who presented him with a choice that was not really a choice at all. The evidence against him was complete. His cooperation was the only variable remaining. He cooperated. Selene learned this from Adaeze in a brief call that afternoon. Krell had provided a full account of his arrangement with Fench, how it had begun, how it had operated, how he had managed the hospital access without raising flags, and critically, a set of financial communications between himself and Fench that provided direct evidence of Fench's personal knowledge and direction of the laundering operation. That last piece is what makes the federal fraud charges unambiguous, Adaeze told her. Direct communications showing executive knowledge and intent. His legal team will try to complicate it, but they won't succeed. When does the indictment happen? Selene asked. 48 hours, Adaeze said. Possibly less. It was less. The indictment came through on a Saturday morning. Federal fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Dario Fench was taken into custody at a commercial property on the north side of Port Carris at 8:14 in the morning. His network, without its financial infrastructure and without the intelligence Krell had been providing, began its collapse almost immediately. 3 of his lieutenants sought counsel by the afternoon. 2 more disappeared from the city by evening, which told investigators everything they needed to know about the network's internal cohesion. By Sunday morning, it was over. Not quietly. Nothing of this scale ended quietly. There would be proceedings, testimonies, legal processes that would take months, but the threat, the active, moving, dangerous threat, was gone. Fench was in custody. The pipeline was exposed. The mole had turned. Selene drove to Meridian General on Sunday morning under a sky that had finally cleared. The harbor catching the early light in long flat sheets. Port Carris doing what coastal cities did after a storm, continuing without drama as though nothing had ever been different. She changed into her coat in the locker room. checked her badge, walked out onto the ER floor. Floor, same sounds, same relentless, necessary motion. She was exactly where she had always been. The case is closed, but the story isn't over. The final batch is the one that will stay with you. Subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs to hear Selene's last words. Here comes the ending you didn't know you needed. He came on a Monday morning. Not as a patient, not as a donor, not announced through Gerald Osei, with a nervous expression and a diplomatic preamble. Marcus Tael walked through the main entrance of Meridian General Hospital at 9:47 in the morning, wearing a dark jacket and no security detail, carrying nothing except himself. And he asked the woman at the reception desk for Dr. Voss, with the quiet directness of a man who had decided exactly what he was going to do and was doing it. The receptionist called up to the floor. A nurse told Selene. Selene was between patients, a rare gap of 4 minutes in a shift that had otherwise given her none. She was standing at the nurse's station reviewing a chart when the message reached her, and she set the chart down with the particular deliberateness of someone filing something away before turning their full attention to what comes next. She found him in the main corridor outside the ER entrance. He was standing to one side of the foot traffic, unhurried, watching the movement of the hospital around him with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not assessment, not the careful management of what he showed. Something more open than that. Something that looked, she thought, like a man allowing himself to simply be somewhere without performing the fact of being there. He saw her the moment she came through the doors. She walked toward him and stopped a few feet away. Neither of them spoke immediately. The corridor moved around them, orderlies, visitors, a family navigating toward the lifts with a child in a stroller, and they stood in the middle of it like two fixed points in a current. "You came," she said. "I said I would," he said. "You didn't, actually. You didn't say anything specific." The corner of his mouth moved. "Then I should have." She looked at him carefully. He looked rested, which pleased her more than she expected. The wound she had sutured 3 weeks ago would be well along in its healing by now. She found herself doing the clinical calculation automatically, the way she always did, and then found herself setting it aside, which was less automatic. "How are you?" she asked, meaning it fully. "All of it." "Honestly?" He held her gaze, unsettled in some ways, cleaner in others. A pause. "Krell?" He stopped, started again. "The conversation I had with him after the federal investigators, I went to see him. I needed to understand it from him directly, not the legal version, the human version." "What did he say?" Marcus looked at a point somewhere past her shoulder for a moment, not distantly, but thoughtfully, as though arranging something precise. "He said he had been afraid for a long time," Marcus said. "That Finch had approached him years ago, when the organization was still operating the way my father ran it, and that by the time I took over and began the transition, Krell was already in too deep to see a way out cleanly. A beat. He said he had wanted to tell me, more than once, that he had started sentences in his head that he never finished out loud." Selene listened without interrupting. "I don't know what to do with that," Marcus said quietly. 9 years of trust and 3 years of betrayal, and a man who was afraid and didn't believe he could say so. He looked back at her. "Is that something that can be understood, or just something that has to be carried?" She thought about it seriously, the way he deserved. "Both," she said. "Understanding it doesn't make it not hurt. Carrying it doesn't mean you can't also understand it. The two things exist at the same time." She paused. "People are rarely purely one thing, Marcus. In 11 years of emergency medicine, I have not once treated a person who was simple. Fear makes people do things that their better selves would not recognize. That's not an excuse, but it is a fact." He looked at her for a long moment. "You said something to me once," he said, "on the phone, that night in the supply corridor. You said you don't wait for permission to act, that you were telling me what you were doing, because that was the difference between partnership and going around someone. I remember. I have been thinking about that. He took a breath. I have spent a great deal of my life making sure that the people around me understood the terms clearly, what I could offer, what I could not, where the limits were. I told myself that was honesty. A pause. I think some of it was also distance. Keeping people at a radius where they were useful and trusted, but not all the way in. She waited. You didn't allow that? He said. You were never at the radius. You were always directly in front of me, looking at me exactly as I was, and not adjusting yourself to make that more comfortable for either of us. He paused. I didn't know what to do with that at first. And now? She said. Now? He said. I think it is the most valuable thing anyone has offered me in a very long time. The corridor continued its movement around them. A monitor beeped somewhere beyond the ER doors. Someone laughed at the nurses' station. The ordinary, relentless life of the hospital carrying on in every direction. Selene looked at Marcus Tael, this man who had sat bleeding in her waiting room 3 weeks ago, and looked up at her with dark, steady eyes and said, I'm fine, when he was not fine at all, who had revealed himself layer by layer over the course of a crisis that neither of them had chosen, who had said we without thinking about it and meant it fully, who stood in front of her now without his radius and without his management and simply looked back at her. Good at your work is not the same as being seen, she said quietly. Not to him specifically, or maybe exactly to him. I have been excellent in this building for 11 years. I have made decisions that saved lives and caught things that other people missed, and held this floor together on days when it should have come apart. And most of the rooms I walked into looked up long enough to register that I was competent, and then looked back down. She paused. I stopped expecting more than that. I told myself that was maturity, that needing to be seen was vanity, that the work was enough. He was very still. It isn't, she said. The work is necessary. The work matters deeply, but it is not the same as being known. It is not the same as someone looking at all of it, the precision and the stubbornness and the 4-minute gaps in a 10-hour shift and the notes no one else keeps, and seeing a person rather than a function. I see a person, Marcus said. His voice was low and completely steady. I have seen a person from the moment you crouched down to my eye level in a waiting room and told my security detail to sit down or leave. A beat. I see someone who does not perform and does not pretend and does not make herself smaller to fit the available space. He paused. I see someone I would very much like to know better if she is willing. Selene held his gaze. Around them the hospital breathed and moved and continued as it always did, as it would after both of them had gone home and come back and gone home again, indifferent to personal moments in the way of all large, necessary institutions. It did not mark the moment. It did not need to. She marked it herself, quietly, in the way she marked everything that mattered, by being fully present in it, by not looking away from it, by letting it be exactly what it was, without managing it into something more comfortable. I have rounds until 2, she said. He almost smiled. I know. After 2, she said, I have no particular plans. The almost smile became an actual one. It changed his face in a way she found she wanted to keep looking at. She filed that observation away with the precision she brought to everything and turned back toward the ER doors. Dr. Voss, he said. She paused without turning. You are not too much, he said quietly. You have never been too much. The rooms that told you that were simply too small. She stood with that for a moment, let it settle into her the way true things settle, not with drama, not with the noise of something long awaited finally arriving, but with the quiet solidity of something that fits exactly where it belongs. Then she pushed through the doors and walked back onto the floor. Same floor, same sounds, same work she had chosen 11 years ago and would choose again without hesitation. But something had shifted, not in the room, in her. and she carried it forward into the next patient, the next decision, the next moment that needed her full and undiminished self. As a woman who had stopped waiting to be seen because she had finally understood the truth that had always been there, waiting for her to claim it. She had never needed the room to change. She had only needed to stop pretending she was not too large for it. And that is the story of Dr. Selene Voss, a woman who was excellent before anyone noticed and whole long before anyone said so. If this story moved you, if it made you sit up a little straighter or think about the rooms you have been making yourself small for, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear this today. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and leave a comment telling us which moment hit you the hardest. Was it Selene in the supply corridor, the dinner at Linden and Gray, or those final words in the corridor? You are not too much. You have never been too much. The rooms that told you that were simply too small. We will see you in the next story. Do not shrink. Do not wait. The right rooms are the ones you build.